Okay, so before we even get to the beaches and overwater bungalows and all that good stuff, we need to travel back in time, like 225 million years back. See, here's the thing most people don't realise. The Maldives didn't always exist on the map. These islands were built, almost accidentally, over hundreds of millions of years. So back when the Earth was basically unrecognisable, all the land on the planet was clumped together into one massive supercontinent called Pangaea. Around 136 million years ago, that supercontinent split into two, a northern half called Laurasia and a southern half called Gondwanaland. As those plates drifted apart, the Indian Ocean began taking shape. Now here's where it gets interesting. So, India was originally part of Gondwanaland, right? But the tectonic forces ripped it loose, and India started drifting northeast. As it moved, it dragged a chain of volcanic islands along with it. That drift ended when the Indian plate slammed into the Asian plate, which, fun side effect, gave us the Himalayas. So what happened to those volcanoes left behind in the Indian Ocean? Well, long story short, they sank. But as they did, corals began to grow on top of them, forming rings around the volcanoes like living walls. Funny thing is, according to Charles Darwin's theory, reef-building corals can't survive deeper than about 40 metres below the surface. So they kept building upward, layer after layer, even as the volcanoes went down. Those old corals died and hardened into rock. Then, the new coral grew on top. Eventually, the volcanoes disappeared completely underwater. And what was left was a ring of coral reef surrounding a shallow lagoon. That, right there, is called an atoll, which then became the Maldives. But wait, that's not the end of our story, because we haven't met the people yet, and unfortunately researchers can't exactly pinpoint when humans started popping up here. According to Maldivian geologist Dr. Muhammad Ali, the islands weren't geologically stable enough for human habitation before 1500 BC, and the most probable date for permanent settlement is closer to 500 BC. Some researchers, on the other hand, push the date earlier to around 2500 BC. That's because they found Maldivian cowrie shells at Lothul, a major port city of the Indus Valley civilization in what's now Gujarat, India. Now, the Indus Valley civilization collapsed well before 1500 BC, and if no one was living on these islands yet, how did those shells get there? Yeah, that's a thinker, which is why the debate is still open. But what we do know is that by around 1500 BC at the latest, the islands had their first permanent residents, most likely Aryan settlers, who were also colonising Sri Lanka around the same time, followed by waves of migrants from southern India and Sri Lanka. Fast forward to around 947 AD, the outside world started taking serious notice of these islands. The Arab and Persian traders arrived in growing numbers, drawn by the Maldives' treasure chest of exports, like pearls, spices, dried fish, coconuts, and, most especially, cowrie shells, which were literally used as currency across Africa and Asia until about the 1500s. These traders did more than trade goods, they exchanged ideas, culture and religion. So, come 1153 AD, the Maldives officially converted to Islam. And with Islam came the Sultanate. The ruler became a sultan, and a string of dynasties followed, namely the Mahli and the Hilali, each holding power for generations. It was during this time that the Maldives began opening up to the wider world diplomatically. But, as you know, opening the door to the world also meant letting the wrong guests in, and one of them was the Portuguese. They invaded in the mid-1500s. They defeated the sitting sultan, and they occupied the islands for 15 years. What ended their rule? It was a guy named Muhammad Takurufanu. He led a revolt which drove them out. He ruled for only 12 years, but his dynasty, Uthimu dynasty, lasted for the next 127 years. After that, it was the Malabar raiders from southern India, then a formal alliance with Sri Lanka, and eventually, in 1887, the Maldives became a British Protectorate. That arrangement lasted only until 1965, because that was when the islands finally gained full independence. 3 years later, in 1968, the Sultanate was abolished, and the Republic of Maldives was officially born. And after all that, no one would expect that everything happened on islands most people couldn't even find on a map. But it did. So let's talk about it. Alright, the Maldives is an archipelago of 1,190 coral islands sitting in the Indian Ocean. Those islands are then grouped into 26 natural atolls. The whole archipelago is a long, narrow strip that's almost entirely made up of ocean. And yes, I mean that literally, because when you look at it, the total surface area of this country, both land and sea combined, comes out to about 90,000 square kilometres. That's nearly 35,000 square miles. Of that, only about 298 square kilometres, or roughly 115 square miles, is actual dry land, which, if we're going to put that into perspective, is less than 1% of its size. So let's zoom in on that, shall we? The islands themselves are tiny, like really tiny. Most of them can be walked across in under 10 minutes, and very few stretch longer than 2 kilometres, or about 1.2 miles. Besides their length, they're also incredibly flat. Most of the land sits less than 1 metre, or about 3 feet, above sea level, and the islands rarely exceed 1.8 metres, roughly 6 feet, at their highest point. No hills, no mountains, no elevation. And yeah, that means it's easy to walk around here, but that flatness also has consequences. In 1812, devastating gales wiped out several northern islands entirely. It happened again in 1955. Then, in 1987, the capital city, Mahalai, was flooded by a severe storm. And with global sea levels rising due to climate change, scientists are increasingly worried about what that means for a country where 80% of the land is less than a metre above the ocean. I mean, just take a look at this. Of the 1,190 islands, only 198 are permanently inhabited. Another 105 or so are dedicated resort islands, and a handful are used for farming and industry. So the human footprint here is tiny, and it's scattered across a massive stretch of open ocean. The good news is, whatever the Maldives lacks in land, it more than makes up for underwater. Because believe it or not, the country is home to roughly 5% of the world's coral reefs, which, for one small nation, is a huge portion. Those reefs support over 1,000 species of fish, and the nutrient-rich currents flowing through the atolls pull in some of the ocean's biggest creatures. To name a few, there are manta rays, whale sharks, hawksbill turtles, dolphins, and sunfish. Honestly, it's one of the most biodiverse marine environments on the planet. No wonder everyone has the Maldives down on their bucket list. And if you do, too, I've got you covered. Check the links in the description below, and you'll find everything you need to make this trip memorable. Cheap flights, beautiful accommodations, sightseeing cruises, and so much more. But apart from the landscape, do you want to know what makes this country so interesting? Its economy. Back in 1984, the GDP per capita in the Maldives was around $800. By 2011, that number climbed to $8,600. And today, it's at $13,000. That's an impressive climb, so it's only natural to wonder, how did they do it? 2 words: tourism and tuna. The Maldives has built one of the most premium resort industries in the world, and the numbers back that up. In 2024, the country welcomed 1.9 million tourists, and in 2025, there was a record of 2.2 million arrivals. The top nationalities that visit this country include China, Russia, and Western Europe. Plus, with the new terminal at Valana International Airport, it was able to boost the annual capacity to over 7.5 million passengers. But more than bringing visitors, tourism actually anchors the entire $7.7 billion economy, alongside the fishing industry, specifically tuna. The fisheries sector employs about 20% of the active labour force. In fact, in the first half of 2025 alone, fish exports surged by 69.2% compared to the same period last year. Besides those two powerhouses, agriculture plays a supporting role here too. It provides income for about a quarter of the rural labour force. And come on, you've seen the landscape. You've seen how thin the strips of land are. So, farming here isn't easy. But local farmers have started using organic hydroponic systems to produce higher quality foods for a growing domestic market. Despite their efforts, though, agriculture contracted by almost 26% in 2024, which is really a concern for people living across the outer atolls who depend on it. Another big concern is inflation. It hit an average of 5% in the first half of 2025, driven primarily by, you guessed it, food, fish, and restaurant prices. But hey, on the bright side, the economy grew by 5% in 2025, and is expected to grow another 4.9% in 2026. But numbers only tell half the story. The other half is the people actually living here. For most people, the Maldives is a postcard, complete with overwater villas and turquoise lagoons. And sure, all of that is real, but underneath the resort brochure is a culture that's worth knowing. For starters, did you know that Maldivians speak Divahi? It's one of a kind and found nowhere else on Earth. Oh, and its script, Thana, was developed from Arabic numerals around the 16th century. I know it's pretty cool, but if there's one thing you need to understand about this place, it's this. They can absorb outside influences, but they always make it entirely its own, which is something you'll see everywhere. If you remember, the Maldives sat right along the ancient spice route, connecting East Asia and the Arab world. That means traders and sailors from South India, Sri Lanka, Arabia, and East Africa all left their mark here. You can hear it in the music, taste it in the food, and see it in the crafts. Now, when it comes to food, the cuisine is built around fish and coconut. Fish in almost every dish, coconut milk in almost every recipe, and Indian spices throughout. Then, after meals, locals chew pho. It's a mix of betel leaf, areca nut, and cloves. But dinner's never complete without entertainment, right? Well, one of the most iconic performances is the Bodu Beiru. It's got singing, drumming, and trance-like dancing that starts slow but gradually builds into something almost hypnotic. And if you watch closely, you'll realise that the rhythms trace directly back to East Africa. Beyond these, there's something else that strikes me about Maldivian culture, and that's their craftsmanship. There's lacquer work, there are woven reed mats, there are coral carvings, all of which have been passed down through generations. And interestingly, the techniques they use to this day have barely changed since ancient times. Then, there's doni. It's the traditional Maldivian boat, refined over centuries into a hydrodynamic vessel that still cuts through these waters today. So basically, it's used for both inter-island transportation and sunset cruises. Speaking of sunset cruises, have you ever experienced one in the Maldives? I imagine it was breathtaking, and I'd love to hear your stories on it, so drop a comment below. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.